Hello, everybody. We are going to get started on this episode 3 of the ADA web series, Self-Evaluations and Notices. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Lisa Denham. She's our expert in the BlueDAG product and also the ADA Title II based platform. I really look forward to listening to her conversation and topics around this. Also, this will be available via YouTube after this, so you will have availability and accessibility to that as well. I thank you for you guys' time.
Hi, everybody. So here's our third episode in our ADA 101 web series, and I'm going to be covering self-evaluations and notices. There's a lot of information in this, so I'm going to try to go through this quickly so we can hit within our 25 minutes requirement. But, for whatever reason, if I go too fast and you have any questions or you want me to slow down, feel free to let me know in the chat or Q&A section of the bottom of your screen. So without further ado, we are going to start. I just want to go over the actual regulations and what it states. This is going to be the only time I'm actually going to read what the law says. But it basically states there's 4 identified principles when it comes to the self-evaluation. It says that a public entity shall, within 1 year of the effective date of this part, evaluate its current services, policies, and practices, and the effects thereof that do not or may not meet the requirements of this part, and to the extent modification of any such services, policies, and practices is required, the public entity shall proceed to make the necessary modifications. A public entity shall provide an opportunity to interested persons, including individuals with disabilities or organizations representing individuals with disabilities, to participate in the self-evaluation process by submitting comments. A public entity that employs 50 or more persons shall, for at least 3 years following completion of the self-evaluation, maintain on file and make available for public inspection a list of the interested persons consulted, a description of areas examined and any problems identified, and a description of any modifications made. And if the public entity has already complied with the self-evaluation requirements of a regulation implementing Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, then the requirements of this section shall apply to only those policies and practices that were not included in the previous self-evaluation. So what I'd like to do is I really would like to first define what the 3 Ps are, and this is really what drives a self-evaluation. The 3 Ps are essentially a policy, a procedure, and a practice. Each of them have a different meaning in the self-evaluation realm. So a policy is a course or principle adopted or proposed by a government. This is the ideals or overarching intentions of the government agency. So the agency does not tolerate discrimination of individuals with disabilities. That is the idea and the principle that is behind a policy, where a procedure is the act or manner of proceeding in a particular course or mode of action. This is how the agency plans to adopt the policy in its daily activities. So as the agency does not tolerate discrimination of individuals with disabilities, we intend to adopt the following procedures in our daily activities, where a practice is the habitual or customary performance or operation. This is a reflection of what is actually being enacted daily by the agency staff. Is the staff implementing this policy or procedure into their daily routine? So in the self-evaluation, a public agency is expected to review their current services, policies, and practices. So by 1993, an agency was to have completed their self-evaluation. So what does that mean? Many routine policies, practices, and procedures are adopted by public entities without thinking about how they might affect people with disabilities. Sometimes a practice that seems neutral makes it difficult or impossible for a person with a disability to participate. In these cases, the ADA requires that public entities to make reasonable modifications in their usual ways of doing things when necessary to accommodate people who have disabilities. The public entity shall provide an opportunity to interested persons. Unfortunately, we are unable to really see how a policy, procedure, or practice may affect an individual with a disability. Without the necessary feedback from individuals with disabilities or the organizations that represent them, we may never truly be able to capture the full impact of the policy, procedure, or practice. That's why this was built into the regulations. This allows for an agency to modify a priority or modify a proposed modification. If they notice that if they've gone as far as noticing there's some kind of discrimination in their policies or procedures, they may propose a modification that really isn't any better. So it's important to include that process, to include the individuals and any organizations that represent them, to make sure that any modifications really do make a positive impact. So then they go into the public agency that has 50 or more persons shall maintain their self-evaluation on file. So that's a big one, because a lot of people think, well, it says that you have to have 50 or more people to have a self-evaluation, and that's not the case. It's a public entity that employs 50 or more persons shall maintain their self-evaluation. So every agency is actually required to complete a self-evaluation, but if they have less than 50 or more employees, then they're not required to maintain it on file and be available for public inspection after the fact. So that's an important dissertation, you might say, of what makes a difference between the self-evaluation being 50 or more people. And then it says if a public entity has already complied with the self-evaluation requirement, that they shall only apply the policies and practices that were not included in the previous self-evaluation. Really what this means is tracking, tracking, and tracking. If a public entity has already complied with the self-evaluation requirement of a regulation, the requirement only applies to the policies and practices that were not included in the previous self-evaluation. So without proper tracking, you're reasonably blind as to what to complete in moving forward. While the information only needs to be posted for 3 years, it is necessary to internally maintain the information. This includes the modifications made as a result of. So the regulation states that you only need to review those that were not included in the previous self-evaluation. So that includes any new policies, any new procedures and practices, but also anything that's been modified. So having a proper archival system that documents what you have surveyed and what modifications have been made is imperative to remaining current with your self-evaluation. So what should a self-evaluation contain? A self-evaluation is a public entity's assessment of its current policies and practices. The self-evaluation identifies and corrects those policies and practices that are inconsistent with Title II's requirements. As part of the self-evaluation, a public entity should, 1, identify all of the public entity's programs, activities, and services. And then 2, review all the policies and practices that govern the administration of the public entity's programs, activities, and services. So in doing so, the ADA best practices and technical assistance manual provides some guidance as to what information should be reviewed. What should you be looking for when you look at your policies, when you look at your procedures, and when you look at your practices and how they impact all of your services and activities. One of the first ones is, are there physical barriers? If there's physical barriers, they need to be placed onto the transition plan. And that's something that's going to prohibit someone in having full access to the programs made accessible by the agency. So next they state, do the policies and the practices exclude individuals? So do you have a policy or practice or procedure that's within your agency that in some way excludes an individual with a disability? Does the agency have policies in place to properly communicate with all individuals? That is to ensure that there are policies in place that allow for effective communication. Do the policies and practices account for individuals with visual impairments? Does the agency have appropriate emergency management procedures in place? How are individuals portrayed in the written and audiovisual materials? Are they portrayed in a way that's offensive or demeaning in manner? That needs to be looked at as well. Are individuals with disabilities given priority in historical preservation programs? Are issues concerning fundamental changes or non-changes made quickly? Can individuals with mobility impairments attend public meetings? Do employment practices ensure compliance with non-discrimination measures? Are there policy provisions to ensure new or altered facilities are constructed using Title II regulations? Are your employees familiar with the policies and procedures? Do they practice them? This is a huge one. I find that this is more often than not something that's regularly overlooked. This is a huge issue with regards to training and making sure that your employees are familiar with the ADA. I think I used this example in the first webinar series where if you've got someone who's a maintenance worker who's out on the street and doing some kind of road work and somebody's crossing the street and they come up to that street worker and they say, hey, you know, that crosswalk there, that wasn't compliant and it made me crossing the street difficult because of, that's a grievance. So how is that street worker aware and know what to do in that kind of a circumstance? Do they know who to refer them to? Obviously, they don't need to be, they're not supposed to facilitate this grievance, but they should know where to refer an individual that comes up to them. So people who work with the public should be aware and should know what the policies are in regards to these issues and should be provided ample training to make sure that they're always complying with them. And then, does your agency know the difference of a current and reformed legal drug user? This is oftentimes I'll see where they, if you have dependencies on any kind of illegal drug, then you're not protected by the ADA. But if you are actually a reformed drug user, you are provided protections under the ADA. So there needs to be a clear delineation between the two. And any individual that has to interact with the public should know that that is a very clear and strict separation. So essentially, a public entity is required to identify the policies and practices that are deny and limit the participation of individuals with disabilities. And they should make immediate remedial action to eliminate the impediments to full and equivalent participation. So as the law's been around for a very long time, it was expected that all these modifications were to be done by January 26, 1995. Obviously, you know, there's lots of agencies that are not in that same boat. So at this point, what needs to be done is any policy or practice that's identified needs to be fixed and remediated immediately. So now we're going to move on to notices. And I'm going to read one more for you. Public entities shall make available to applicants, participants, beneficiaries, and other interested persons information regarding the provisions of this part and its applicability to the services, programs, or activities of the public entity, and make such information available to them in such a manner as the head of the entity finds necessary to apprise such persons of the protections against discriminations assured them by the Act in this part. So essentially, individuals need to know that they are protected. How do we do that? The ADA Toolkit and Best Practices state there are three main considerations for providing notice. One, who is the target audience for the ADA notice? What information shall the notice include? Where and how should the notice be provided? So your target audience it includes applicants, beneficiaries, and other people interested or in the state or local government programs, activities, or services. The audience is expansive and includes everyone who interacts or would potentially interact with the state or local government. The The toolkit provides you a list of individuals, recipient of social services, an applicant for a public library card, a public transit user, a person who uses county recreation center, so on and so forth. But really, they want you to think outside of the box. Who would benefit from viewing the city's notice? Think of who your constituents are and reach out to them in the way that they would best see and be able to notice the county's or the city's ADA notice. So what information shall the notice include? It should be brief. It should state the basics, and it should include the name and contact information of the ADA coordinator. It should include brief statements about employment, effective communication, making reasonable accommodations to policies and programs, not placing surcharges on modifications or auxiliary aids and services, and filing complaints. And where should the notice be provided? A big one, this is often overlooked. Publishing and publicizing the ADA notice is not a one-time requirement. You do not put your ADA notice out on your website and forget about it, and 10 years down the road realize that it's completely inaccurate, it's not correct, it doesn't provide all the information it needs to be provided. So where should you provide notice? On your job applications, local newspaper, local radio and TV stations, agencies' websites, which you have to make sure is accessible, at all of your facilities, your program handbooks, your activity schedules, your meetings, your public transit spots. Any place where there's going to be an impact, you want to make sure that your notice is provided. As a result, the DOJ provided the following sample notice. You can find this on ada.gov under the toolkit, and this is just a sample notice of information that they've provided. If you were to use this notice, you would most likely want to replace this seal with your own city seal, and then where they have this information, you would want to make sure that that information is accurately reflected for your agency. But really, it comes back down to tracking, and tracking. To ensure you have the proper protections, it's necessary to manage and track all of your notices. This includes, how did you post it? Where did you post it? What information was posted? When did you post it? How often did you post it? These are all things that are very relative, and you need to make sure that that's all documented. Did information change? Did you get a new ADA coordinator? That happens very often, and notices just don't get updated. So you need to make sure that, did you revise your notice to reflect the new and revised information? How did you post it? Where did you post it? What information was posted? When did you post it? All this information needs to be tracked and managed so you have all the proper protections that you have or that you want to have for your city, your county, and your state. So how does an agency manage and track and comply with all this information? This is where we come back to BlueDAG. BlueDAG has been created to assist you with the management of all of your administrative requirements. This includes a full self-evaluation and notice archival system to enable you to fully manage all of these requirements. It allows you to track when you post, what you post, how often you post, where you post, all the information that you need to have. So if you need to do an update on your self-evaluation, you can come in, look at the departments or the policies, the procedures, the practices, things you've already reviewed. Have they been reviewed already? Do you need to re-review something? Is something new? Do you need to document that? That can all be archived within the BlueDAG system. So essentially, that is about where we end. I have one final webinar that I'd like to invite you all to, and that's going to be Projects, Grievances, and Your Transition Plan 101. And it's our final webinar in this web series, and we're going to be discussing how all three of these particular topics all rely on each other and kind of come together to form one document that needs to be updated and managed to really provide you the protections that you need. So that episode is going to be Thursday, April 27th at noon, and I'm hoping that everybody comes. So now I'm going to go ahead and open it up to any questions if you have any. Okay, I do have a question here. It says, how often must we review our programs? It's supposed to be continuously updated and reviewed. So essentially, if you have a new policy or procedure or practice or something that has changed, as you change it, you should be reviewing it according to the regulations and be looking at those items that I discussed. Let's see, I have, is there a budgetary requirement for publishing notices? There is not a budgetary requirement. It's really up to the agency head to determine the best way to provide notice and how to reach out to the community, what information should be presented, how it should be presented. All of that is kind of that's all how it ties into publishing your notices. So the last one is, how does BlueDAG help with notices? Within BlueDAG, we actually have an archival system that is documents all the information for your notices. So it will actually maintain and manage all of your notices with the information of how it was posted, when it was posted, what information was listed. So that way you can go in any time and go back and review any of your other notices that you've done so that you can kind of make sure that you're keeping that current and up to date. I was wondering if I have any more questions, because right now I am out of questions. Any questions? All right. Well, obviously, if you do find that you have any questions about the information that I've presented, you're always welcome to shoot me an email, and I'm more than happy to provide you any information after the fact. I'm going to send this. If anybody wants a copy of this PowerPoint, I can submit that as well. I think that is about it. Anybody else have any questions? Want to say something?
No. Thank you so much, Lisa. We appreciate everyone who attended today. This will be posted also, like Lisa said, on our BlueDAG YouTube channel. We really look forward to being able to provide these and being able to display our capabilities from a BlueDAG perspective on the Title II platform and keeping in compliance. It's our advocacy to ensure that these evaluations are done quickly, and you have the opportunity as a municipality to be able to go out there and correct these issues as quickly as possible and remain in compliance. So we thank you so much in going through this webinar, and I hope that it's helped you, and we look forward to helping others. Have a wonderful day.